So today, we're going to dive into something called the architecture of control. We're going to unpack the invisible systems that really shape our daily lives, everything from the jobs we take to the debts we carry. We'll be looking at how work, debt, and surveillance are all connected, creating this complex web that, honestly, is often hidden in plain sight.
Let's just start with a really direct question for you. Think about your day-to-day choices, what you buy, where you work, how you spend your time when you finally get a moment. Are those decisions truly 100% yours? Or are they actually influenced by a system that kind of limits your options before you even get to choose?
And that question, it gets us to this huge paradox of modern life. We talk all the time about freedom and choice, but are we really as free as we think we are? The source material we're looking at today argues that underneath all that talk, there's a hidden architecture of control. So today, we're going to map out this labyrinth and see what it's really made of.
All right, here's our game plan. We'll start with that paradox of freedom, then dig into the three big pillars of control. We're also going to look at how these systems have changed in the digital age. And finally, we'll get to the role of debt and ownership in holding this whole thing up.
So this is the big question, right? How can we feel so free and yet be so constrained? Well, the answer seems to lie in what our source calls design dependence. And this concept, it is absolutely key to understanding the invisible bind that shapes our lives. This, right here, this gets to the absolute heart of it. The system doesn't have to force you to work, it just has to remove all the other options. By privatizing land and resources, a process that really got going with the enclosure movement centuries ago, it creates a world where working for a wage is basically the only way to survive. And you have to understand, this wasn't an accident, it's the design.
And that is the crucial point. This dependence isn't a flaw in the system, it is the system. By making wage labor the only game in town for survival, it guarantees a steady supply of workers. This is the engine that makes the whole architecture of control run. Okay, so if dependence is the foundation, what are the pillars holding this whole structure up? Well, our source points to three key elements that work together to keep the system in place. Let's take a look at each one.
And here they are, the three pillars of control: work, debt, and surveillance. Think about it. Work disciplines our bodies and our time. It sets the whole rhythm of our lives. Debt disciplines our future, locking us into these long-term promises. And surveillance, it disciplines our present, watching to make sure we stay in line. Together, they create this incredibly powerful system that touches every single part of our lives. And the key here is that these three pillars aren't just standing there on their own. No way. They are completely intertwined, creating this self-reinforcing loop of control. Your work is tracked by surveillance, which then might affect your credit score. And your debt? Well, that keeps you chained to your job. It's a closed loop, and it's incredibly tough to break out of.
You know, to control anything, you first have to be able to see it. There's a word for this from the scholar James C. Scott: legibility. Governments and corporations are constantly trying to make us readable, to map us out with data collection and tracking. Every click, every purchase, every time your phone pings a location, it makes you more legible. It allows them to manage us, tax us, and discipline us more effectively. Control always starts with visibility.
So how has this whole architecture adapted to our digital world? In this next section, we're going to see how the old factory has been replaced by the platform and how our screens have basically become the new walls of the labyrinth.
The platform economy, we're talking everything from Uber to social media, is the new factory floor. Algorithms have replaced human bosses. Star ratings have replaced old-school discipline. The whole system is gamified to keep us hooked, turning our work and even our free time into a non-stop stream of data. The line between work and play, it's pretty much gone.
And this is where things get really dangerous. In the old factory, at least you knew who your boss was. You could organize, you could fight back. But how do you resist an algorithm? This shift to invisible, automated control makes power totally faceless, totally unaccountable, and a whole lot harder to challenge.
Okay, let's turn to that second pillar of control: debt. In our society, debt is not just one thing. It actually has two completely different faces, and which one you see really depends on who you are. And this slide just lays it out so clearly, doesn't it? For the wealthy, debt is a tool. It's a lever you pull for investment to build even more wealth and acquire assets. It's often shielded by corporate law, and it's surprisingly easy to forgive. But for the rest of us, debt is a weapon of discipline. It's used to extract our future wages, and man, it can follow you for your entire life. The late anthropologist David Graeber, who was just brilliant on this stuff, he called this the moral inversion of obligation. It's such a powerful idea. He's describing a system where the very people and corporations with the most power to pay off their debts get to escape them, while the people with the least are completely burdened. In this system, justice isn't blind at all. It's actually determined by your social class. And we see these instruments of debt discipline everywhere, right? Student loans, credit card balances, payday loans. These aren't just financial products. They are tools for controlling your future and making sure you keep participating in the wage economy. So we've walked through the maze. We've seen the walls. But what's it all built on? What's the foundation? In our final section, we're going to look at the ultimate source of power in this entire system, the power of owning things. It all comes down to this idea of rentier capitalism. Basically, it's an economic system where you don't get rich by producing things or providing useful services. You get rich by owning assets and then charging everyone else for access to them. Think of a landlord who just collects rent, or a company that owns a patent and collects royalties. That's rentier capitalism in a nutshell. And once you see it, you start to see it everywhere. It's the rent you pay your landlord. It's the royalties on a patent. It's the fees that platforms like the App Store charge for every transaction. The modern rentier doesn't just own land anymore. They own the choke points of our digital lives. At the end of the day, the entire architecture of control that we've been talking about is built on one single foundation: the concept of property. This idea that individuals or corporations can own and control resources and exclude everyone else from them, that is the absolute cornerstone of this system. You know, this idea of private property, it wasn't always a thing. It actually evolved over time. It went from a world of shared resources, what we call the commons, to the enclosure of land in Europe, which is what forced people into wage labor in the first place. And today, we're seeing the enclosure of the digital commons as corporations try to privatize the internet and control our online lives. It's the same exact pattern, just on a new frontier. And that's really what this has all been about. It's been an exercise in map making. By mapping the architecture of control, by making its walls and its logic visible, we can start to see the exits. We're not just victims stuck in this maze. We can be the cartographers of our own liberation. So, by making the invisible visible, we've taken the first and most important step toward reclaiming our own choices. But you know, a map is only as good as the person who uses it. Now that we have a clearer picture of the labyrinth, the real question is, what are we going to do about it?